Jessica. Good afternoon. We're so excited to have you interviewing for the Black Co-op Matters interview series for Elizabeth Carter's law firm. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. We're so excited to have you as the co-director of Start.coop. You've had so much extensive experience as an educator, founder, and more working within the co-op sector and across continents. Could you tell our viewers a little bit more about your background?
Sure, yeah. So my career began actually in education and with a particular focus on early childhood. I was looking at how can we use science to inform policy interventions that improve conditions for children and families facing extreme adversity. And that work led me to think about the broader societal context that shapes our lives and shapes the lives of those who face the greatest amount of adversity in society. As I was trying to figure out how do we make a real dent in that sort of intractable problem, I started doing work in the social innovation space and thinking about how do we bring innovation methods into this world to influence the impact that we're seeing. And as I started to work with innovation methods, I started to think about the much broader implications of how innovation could be used to drive social change, not just in early childhood, but beyond. And so I started a consulting practice really focused on that, focused on working with nonprofits and foundations and with the government, and then also was consulting with Start.coop prior to joining as co-director and working with the entrepreneurs to really think about how they can use innovation methods to drive their businesses forward. And so I was doing that as a consultant and then was asked by the board to join as co-director along with Greg Brodsky, who's the founder of Start.coop.
Amazing. So you mentioned some of these social innovations. Could you give us an example of like what that
Yeah,
would look
so a lot of the work we were doing was focused on thinking about, when you look at the real lived experience of families facing poverty and families facing adversity, what are the things that are actually working really well for them? Where have they found ways to make up for all the system failures that they faced? And they've sort of come up with these solutions themselves. And how do we help support that inherent innovation that's happening within these communities? But also, how do we use a sort of problem solving lens to sit down and co-design with members of these communities to say, what are the challenges you're facing and how can we help bring the tools or the attention or the focus to these issues and help think about how we might solve them in innovative ways. So that could be anything from nutrition and feeding programs for young children in Guatemala. It could be learning programs for young children in Peru, or it could be health programs for families and school districts here in the US. So we worked across a number of different domains, but a lot of different ways of thinking about existing challenges and how we confront them.
great. And so, how do you think that your experiences, I know that you mentioned as an educator, you were kind of working with, certain like vulnerable groups and like, how do you think that's shaped the way you advocate for Black and Brown cooperatives?
Yeah, so there's sort of two parts to that question. There's one part which is cooperatives, and the second part which is advocating for Black and Brown founders or Black and Brown cooperatives and Black and Brown communities. And I grew up in Australia, so the sort of moment at which I became aware of race was a lot later than I think a lot of folks who grew up in the U.S. And when I came to the US, I came for university and I was sort of starting to think about race as a college student and starting to have the educational journey as a white woman of immense privilege, right? I had a lot of socioeconomic privilege and I was really aware of that, but I wasn't aware of my racial privilege. I didn't understand I didn't know what that was, right? And so I was on my own journey, and I think my career has largely been on my own journey. That's taken me to want to confront both economic privilege, and that's where I think cooperatives really come in, but also racial privilege. I think the system is we know the system is completely stacked against Black and Brown communities here in the U.S., and I don't think that's okay. And if I can direct my career to doing something about that, to being a part of the solution, that's the work I want to be doing.
Did you see any parallels from, growing up in Australia with how maybe the Black and Brown people are certain things that we're facing here versus like in Australia? What's the dynamic there?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for days about this.
Oh,
So, just to sort of say, oh, I grew up in Australia and I had no awareness of race. It's not that racial disparity doesn't exist in Australia.
right.
It's a colonial country. Of course, racial disparity exists, and particularly with the Indigenous population. And so it's just that the way the Aboriginal population and non-white populations in general were treated when I was growing up there was largely that they were segregated, not necessarily through intentional segregation efforts per se, but the systems, the way that the society operated, these communities were segregated. They lived really far away from where I lived, right? I didn't come across Aboriginals in my daily life. And so I think that my, thinking about the impact of race and the way it impacts all of our opportunity, the way it impacts our outcomes and what we're able to do in life wasn't something that I ever really faced because it just wasn't part of my daily existence. And I think that's one of the things that um, we need to take the time to dismantle and to say it's impossible. It should be impossible for children to grow up without knowing about, without thinking about, without coming to terms with what their status in life is and how others' status is affected by their status and the interplay between the two. And what does white supremacy mean? And that was just not part of my growing up for
Right.
better or for worse. And really, it's for worse.
Yeah, it does seem like a lot of different states are coming out with, trying to push certain things or hide certain things. I know, I think in one of the states, instead of discussing slavery, they want to discuss involuntary immigration. That's the term that they want to use for it. I was like, that's
Right.
interesting. That's a first I've heard for that. Um, but so, what kind of challenges do you think you see Black cooperatives are facing today, and how is Start.coop providing assistance?
Sure. I mean, I think, let's be honest, I think Black corporates are facing many of the same challenges that Black entrepreneurs generally are facing, right? It's about access to opportunity. And we just know that in terms of capital, both social capital and financial capital, Black entrepreneurs don't have access to these capital at the same rate that white and other entrepreneurs do. And so that's a huge challenge when you are starting a business, when you are giving everything you have to start a business, to not have the networks, the connections, to not have access to startup financing, that makes it near impossible. And we know that so many folks say, oh, just raise a family and friends round. But we know that for many people, and particularly many people in the Black community, because of historical injustice, you can't just turn around and raise a family and friends round. And so part of what we're trying to do at Start.coop is give Black and Brown entrepreneurs, and all entrepreneurs, but with a particular focus on Black and Brown entrepreneurs, a platform from which to build a really thriving cooperative business. So we provide a learning experience through a robust curriculum. We provide individualized coaching. We provide mentoring. We provide access to shared services. And we provide investment to say, these are all the things that other folks get when they go through Techstars or Y Combinator or any other number of sort of entrepreneurial support programs. We want to provide these things too, but we want to do specifically for cooperatively owned businesses. And then we want to do so with a real focus on how can we also lift up Black and Brown entrepreneurs who are just completely left out of the entrepreneurial system.
Yeah, every cooperative that I've spoken to, or just people that are involved in this co-op space, the biggest challenge that Black co-ops are facing is definitely like access to resources like funding and learning. Is some of it, you're just already at this disadvantage because you don't understand how to navigate this space, or, just having a business in general, being a business owner, that is just, it's hard because you might not have people that you can go to discuss certain topics. And so that's really great that you're able to provide those resources for Black co-ops and, founders so that they can have a successful co-op.
Yeah, and I think it would be incredibly short-sighted of us, or oversimplistic to say, oh, it's just about finances, right? It's just about money. If we just could solve the money issue, I think solving the financing issue is absolutely massive for cooperatives writ large, but particularly for Black and Brown founders. there's a lot you need to do as you build your business to get ready to have investment, to receive investment, or to get ready to take on a loan. And if you don't have really strong business fundamentals, then taking on a loan or taking on an equity investment is a terrible idea, right? It's going to completely burden and hold you down and lock you into something that you may not have a hope of being able to repay. And so it's also about making sure that folks have access to all of the supports that help them have really strong business fundamentals, that help them figure out what is our business model, who is our customer, how are we going to reach them. And that, to your point, is about knowing someone who's really great at digital marketing and help you build your digital marketing strategy, or really good at financials and helps you build out your financial projections so that you can have that conversation with the investor. And so for all of our entrepreneurs, and particularly for our Black and Brown entrepreneurs, we want to make sure we're providing all of these sort of platform pieces that give folks the chance to then be ready for the investment conversation. They're all just as important, and they all come together like pieces of a puzzle to ensure that these co-ops then have the opportunity they need to be able to really thrive.
Exactly. Because once you get the funding, doesn't matter if you don't know like how to use it or what to do. And so then yeah, like you said, it becomes a burden. So
Right.
that's really great that you're able to provide that additional, necessary guidance that Black co-ops need. And then I read an article that you did for Medium, and you mentioned that about 33% of your co-ops have Black founders. Have you seen any improvements since then? And what are you doing to ensure that that number increases?
Yeah, so I'm happy to say that the article you read is actually out of date.
Okay.
So in year one, first year of our accelerator program, 20% of our businesses, it was actually just 1 in 5, had a Black founder. In year two, it was the 33% number that you mentioned. And in year three, which is this past year, the cohort we just graduated, which is our 2021 cohort, it's actually 43%.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're seeing improvements year on year. We'd love to see it continue to improve. But we're really excited about that. And it's really, I think, due to some pretty conscious efforts that we're making as an organization to say, we're an incredibly wide organization. And when we started, we were just trying to sort of pull all the pieces together and launch an accelerator. But there came a point at which we said, we can't just build and sort of have this excuse of being a startup. And, we need to actually focus on doing what's best by Black and Brown entrepreneurs if truly we're going to say that this is a particular interest of our accelerator program. And so we've made a number of different changes, particularly over the course of the last 18 months, that are trying to increase not only the number of Black and Brown entrepreneurs in our program, but also the extent to which they feel welcomed and they feel a sense of belonging within the program. So that ranges, and there are sort of 5 major actions we took. I'm going to see if I can remember them all off the top of my head. So the first action was really about how we recruit, right? Where do we find people and how do we recruit? So if we rely on our networks, if our networks are predominantly white, we're obviously not going to be able to find these really high potential Black and Brown entrepreneurs. So how are we doing outreach and how are we finding great entrepreneurs? The second piece is our evaluators. So when you apply to Start.coop, your application is screened and then it's shared with a group of evaluators. And it's read by a number of evaluators who score it. And then we invite the top scoring applications to interview. But we wanted to make sure that that group of evaluators included Black and Brown individuals who were able to bring their perspective to this conversation and to the evaluation process. So we're really pleased that this year we had 41% Black evaluators and 63%, I think it's 63, by POC evaluators. And so that's really exciting too. We've also taken a look at our curriculum and our faculty. So we wanted to make sure that we had a higher number of Black and Brown faculty members. We're taking a number of different sort of approaches to really think about what does it look like to be a Black and Brown entrepreneur in our program, and how do we make that, like I said earlier, the most welcoming experience, and how do we craft a sense of belonging where Black and Brown entrepreneurs feel like they can really build businesses that can grow and thrive despite all of the hardship that they face.
Right.
And so we wrote an updated Medium post we can share in the section below. And that really outlines each of the 5 steps we've taken. We're not perfect, right? We certainly have a lot of learning and growth to do ourselves. We still remain a largely white organization. We've taken some steps to diversify our board, and we're really excited to have board members of color, particularly Black board members from our alumni who have joined our board in the last 6 months. And so we're thrilled about that. But we do have a lot of work to do, and we recognize that, but we are certainly proud of what we've accomplished to date and hope to see it continue to improve.
Right. It sounds like you're making strides. I'm curious, how many co-ops do you take for each class?
So we'll take up to 8 co-ops for each class. It typically is between 6 and 8. This past year we had 7. And it really is about making sure that we're bringing on entrepreneurs who have what it takes to go through the program, to actually feel benefit from the program, right? To get what they need to grow their businesses and then continue to build and grow. And that originally had a lot to do with our financing model. So originally the way the program was financed is that we would make an investment in these businesses, and over time they would repay that investment at a multiple. And so we needed to make sure we were choosing the best entrepreneurs who were really well placed to build these thriving businesses, these thriving co-ops, and repay that investment over time. And that's a real challenge, because there have been some co-ops that we just really wanted to support. We thought that they should exist. They need to be in this world, but they weren't necessarily good investments, good candidates for investment. And so that's a real tension for us, is to say, what do we do with these businesses, these co-ops that we think should totally exist, but they're not a great fit for the way we are currently financed and the way that our accelerated program works. So we try and work with other partner organizations within this space to ensure that these organizations have everything they need to thrive, right? These co-ops have everything they need. If they can't get it from us, perhaps they can get it from others.
That's good. So you're still trying to set them up for success, and even if you're not able to provide that assistance. Um, what are, so I know you mentioned the investors. Are you working specifically with investors that are focusing on investing in Black and Brown companies, or how are you ensuring that those investors want to like fund equity for Black co-ops?
Yeah, we're very upfront with our investors about our focus. Obviously, we're interested in cultivating the next generation of co-ops with ambitions of scale writ large, but we are very upfront with these investors about our particular focus on uplifting and supporting Black and Brown entrepreneurs and co-ops that serve Black and Brown communities. So we're really lucky to count with a group of investors for whom most of them this is also a priority. So they're sort of already along for that journey. And in cases where we have some investors who maybe haven't thought about that as much in the past, or haven't committed themselves as deeply to that yet, we're here to take that journey with them and to tell them about why we think this is really important, what the history of Black and Brown cooperatives is, and how strong that history is, and why we're committed to this, and hopefully they'll join us in that too.
Great. And what does being anti-racist mean to you, specifically within the co-op community?
Yeah, so I mean, to me,
Like
being
broad,
anti-racist, it means tearing down everything that lets white supremacy thrive, right? It means completely undermining white supremacy and saying enough is enough, can't continue on like this, and we have to do everything we can so that at every turn we're taking actions that undermine rather than perpetuate white supremacy, and in doing so that we are uplifting Black and Brown communities, and in our case, uplifting Black and Brown entrepreneurs. So for us, it's thinking about every aspect of our program and every aspect of our interactions with our community, and saying, how are we uplifting those who want to succeed, and how are we working together to break down the innumerable systems that are out there to stop Black and Brown entrepreneurs from being able to build these beautiful businesses, these beautiful co-ops. And not just beautiful co-ops, I mean, that's a very co-op-y thing to say, right? But these really successful co-ops who are going to go off and do incredible things in the world. And so I sort of personally see it as my role is to break down the barriers to success for the entrepreneurs in our program. And so for our Black and Brown entrepreneurs, if that means that I need to be a part, and we need to be a part of breaking down systems of oppression, that's where we need to be, and that's what we need to be doing. And I'm pleased to be on that journey alongside our Black and Brown entrepreneurs. This isn't a case of us leading or knowing what's best, but really working with the entrepreneurs in our program and those in our community to say, well, how can we do this together, and what does this look like? How do we bust down all of those barriers so that you really have every opportunity to thrive and to build an incredible cooperative business?
right, like asking like what do you need, and then also making sure you already are very vocal about it, but making, I think that's what it means too, is like not being afraid to be vocal about how you feel, about how you want to be anti-racist. I feel like sometimes people want to be, but maybe they're like a little bit nervous, or I'm not sure. I mean, these are hard conversations that our country has been having, and I think it's great that we're continuing this conversation. Um,
I mean,
so
I think the thing is you have to be afraid to make, or not afraid to make mistakes and to make missteps, right? We as an organization and me as an individual, I've made innumerous mistakes and missteps when it comes particularly to issues of race. We are all on a journey learning. I say we white people are on a journey learning about how to be allies and advocates to, our Black and brown peers. And that's going to be a journey in which we make mistakes. And we have to sort of have the courage to say, okay, we're going to put ourselves out there and do this, and recognize that it's not always going to go right, but it is on us to break down the system that we've built and to collectively build back a system that is stronger and better, but first and foremost, more equitable.
how do you think Start.coop has been received by the Black community?
So I think you can break this question down into two parts. The first is, how are cooperatives received by the Black community? And I think that there are the same misperceptions in the Black community as there are in the white community, as there are sort of writ large across the United States about cooperatives, right? Many, many misperceptions about what cooperatives are and how they work. And so we have a lot of work to do to fix that, to change the narrative, to explain what are cooperatives, and let's talk about why they're a viable alternative to traditional capitalism. And let's talk about the history of cooperatives in the Black and brown community, and particularly in the Black community, and say, cooperatives have played such an important part, mutualism has played such an important part in your history. How can we make that story available? How can we share that with you, with a broader audience, so that folks can say, hey, I had no idea that cooperatives were such a part of my history, and I'm really interested in learning more about cooperatives. And we've had incredible Black entrepreneurs come to us with exactly that experience, sort of having absolutely no idea that that cooperatives had such a strong rooted history in the Black community, and saying like, and then my eyes were opened and I was like, oh my gosh, this is for me. Like, how did I not know about this, right? So I think there's that first piece about sort of cooperatives. And then answering your question about how Start.coop is received in the Black community, I don't know. But I would guess with a lot of skepticism, as we should be, right? We're a white-led organization that is new, young, or like 3 years old, right? And trying to do really good work, but certainly having made missteps along the way. And I think, I hope that we are working to build trust with Black and brown entrepreneurs, and that over time they come to see us as a peer and as a partner in this sort of struggle to cultivate more co-ops, particularly those that are either led by Black and brown entrepreneurs or serving the Black and brown communities. But I would not be surprised if you said, well, there's some skepticism, and I would say there should be, and I want to be held to account, and I want us to be held to a higher standard and to prove ourselves. And that's what I think we at Start.coop have to do, is to prove ourselves to be the allies and the advocates that we want to be. And I hope that we're doing that.
It sounds like it. So I guess only time will tell.
Only time.
Right. And I was curious, what kind of legal services are your co-ops receiving? Or are you
Sure.
providing legal
So
services?
yeah, so our co-ops take advantage of many different types of legal representation. The first and foremost is around governance. So thinking about the construction of bylaws and thinking about how they think about their governance model. That's probably the most pressing concern for many of our co-ops, given the stage of growth that they're in. And then we also are speaking with legal counsel, and our co-ops have attorneys who are helping them with their term sheets, right? So when they're thinking about investment and how they're going to raise and what that looks like, they're collaborating with counsel on term sheets and other documents related to crowdfunding or related to an equity raise or any sort of financing and fundraising. So they're interfacing with attorneys a lot. And I think it's one of the areas in which we're so pleased to be able to sort of turn to our peers in this sector and really great, well-respected attorneys like Elizabeth Carter and others and say, here are these co-ops who are building their bylaws, or here's a co-op who's about to do this great equity crowdfund. Can you help them? And what can we do together? And so it's really a partnership to make that work.
Right. Do you think, well, how important do you think having Black legal representation for the Black co-ops is? And are you making efforts to, well, you also mentioned Elizabeth, but are you making efforts to make sure that there's also diversity in their legal representation as well?
Yeah, 100%. So we recognize that all of our faculty and all of our support providers need to be diverse. And specifically, we want to make sure that we have Black professionals among them, both because we think it's important just in terms of having diverse perspectives for all of our entrepreneurs, but also so that we make sure that there's real representation for our Black and Brown entrepreneurs too. I think it's really important. I think that when you enter into a relationship with a legal representative, with an attorney or your counsel, you need to be entering into a relationship with someone you trust and someone you're comfortable with. And for some folks, that might be someone who is of the same race, specifically because of all the systemic biases, specifically because of all the structural inequity and the oppression that the Black community has faced for so many years. And so to me, if that means that you have a lawyer who has the same skin tone and has the same racial background as you, like, great. If that's who you trust and that's who you're comfortable with, let's go down that path. I see it as my job to help entrepreneurs thrive and give them what they need to thrive. And if that's what our entrepreneurs want, if they want to see legal representation that is the same race as they are, then absolutely we're going to fulfill that need. Happily, we want to have a diverse set of service providers. And I think it's important. And when our entrepreneurs think it's important, so do we.
Exactly. Great. And then my final question for you is, what is some advice that you have for others that are interested in creating their own co-op?
Well, firstly, the co-op community is extremely friendly. I'm actually relatively new to the co-op community myself. As I explained earlier, I didn't come out of the co-op community. I've been now for probably about 3 years, but this is an incredibly friendly and welcoming community. So my first piece of advice is just to reach out to folks within this community and get your questions answered, right? To ask all the questions you have and to talk to people and learn about their experience and then learn from their experience to inform your own. So that's number one. Number two is really, if you're interested in starting a co-op, we recently launched a free online course called Lean Co-op, and we can share the link for that. But that is a free resource that's specifically intended to help folks thinking about beginning a co-op walk through the early stages of what is your business going to be? What's the business model? How will it work? And what's your ownership model? What will governance look like? Who are your stakeholders? Who are your members? And to really start to ask themselves those important early questions as they build the fundamentals for their business. So that course is a great resource and I highly encourage it. And then the other thing I would say is to jump on the Start.coop website. We have tons of case studies and resources available. And that's why they're there. It's to help cultivate the next generation of cooperatives at scale. And we want to be there to support that. And so jump on the website to reach out for support and to reach out to us and to our peer organizations who are all really trying to build and strengthen this industry and strengthen cooperatives at large.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. It's been so great talking to you and learning more about Start.coop and how you're working towards diversifying the co-op community and providing resources for Black co-ops. It's so great to have allies like you that are helping.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's important work, and I'm glad that we can partner on this together.
Yes. And so I want to also reach out to our viewers and make sure that they are aware of our Instagram and our newsletter. So please follow us on Instagram at ELCESQ LLC. And that's for our handle for Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And sign up for our newsletter on our website, elcesqllc.com. And please don't forget to contribute to our hashtag Black Capital Matters Gift Legal Fund. Thank you. Whoa.